Hi there, and welcome to Oakland Side 510. I'm Tasneem Raja, editor of the Oakland Side, Oakland's independent nonprofit newsroom. Today, we'll talk about a tree cutting case that had Oakland debating whether its environmental laws mean anything, a proposal to replace the Rockridge Trader Joe's with 2 senior housing towers, and what Oakland is actually trying to do about homelessness and whether any of it can work. Our housing reporter, Natalie Orenstein, has been on a roll with this stuff, and she joins me to dig into all of it. After that, I'm going to tell you about the latest on new restaurants in town, a beloved muralist we lost this week, a Catholic church closure affecting several Oakland parishes, where the Alameda County DA race stands financially, and the long-awaited reopening of the Mosswood Recreation Center. But first, a word from a local company supporting this podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by the owners of Jack London Square, Oakland's waterfront right at the edge of the estuary. Whether you're catching the Sunday farmers market, grabbing dinner with a bay view, or just taking a walk past the historic Heinold Saloon, Jack London Square is where Oakland meets the water. With restaurants, live events, the ferry to San Francisco, and more, it is Oakland's only publicly accessible waterfront destination. Come see what's happening. Visit jacklondonsquare.com. All right, let's get into our main story this week. On the housing beat, our senior reporter, Natalie Orenstein, has had a string of stories that have really gotten people talking. We're going to dig into 2 of them. Then we're going to switch gears and spend some time on a big policy question. What is Oakland actually trying to do about homelessness, and can any of it work? Natalie, welcome.
Thanks, Tasneem. Happy to be here.
Let's start with a story that I've heard a lot of people talking about, the tree cutting case up in the Claremont area. Set the scene for us.
Yeah, so there's this vacant hillside lot on Claremont Avenue. It used to be covered in oak trees, but between 2021 and 2022, the property owners, 2 people named Matthew Bernard and Lynn Warner, they cut down 38 trees there. These were mostly coast live oaks, Oakland's namesake trees, as well as some big leaf maples, some buckeyes, others. The problem was they didn't have permits to cut down these trees. So Oakland has this protected tree ordinance, which says you need a permit to remove trees of a certain size. There's some exceptions for, say, invasive species like eucalyptus and Monterey pine.
Sure.
So in this case, city staff and police warned these property owners multiple times. The city even visited the property in May 2022 and found Bernard and workers from a private company in the middle of cutting down a final 3 trees.
Wow.
Yeah, the city told them to stop, but Bernard, at least according to the city, told the workers to keep on going. So the city assessed fines based on the size of the trees and international standards. The individual fines range from $750 for a small plum tree to $95,000 for a mature coast live oak.
Wow.
So the total came to just over $915,000.
Nearly $1 million. Now, I think it's important to make it clear that's what the total came to, from the assessors. The city then was in the position of having to decide whether or not to actually go ahead and impose the fine on these property owners or, whether to reduce it somehow.
Right. And the city council did just vote on Tuesday to impose the full $915,135 fine, which might be the largest ever fine in Oakland for destroying trees. But it did take 3 attempts to get there. The council actually deadlocked twice before, including at a meeting in April where the vote tied and the mayor declined to break the tie. In the end, just this week, 5 council members voted for the full fine. That was Ramachandran, Gayo, Jenkins, Unger, and Wong. Brown, Fife, and Houston voted no.
So what was the debate here? Why did this take so long to figure out?
Yeah, so Brown and Fife wanted a more favorable outcome for Bernard and Warner, the property owners. Brown called the tree ordinance outdated, and she argued that it felt unfair to impose such a large fine for trees the city would have likely permitted removal of anyway if they'd followed the legal steps. So she tried to get her colleagues to vote for a fine that was roughly $300,000 less than the full amount.
Mm-hmm.
Fife raised some concerns about racially inequitable enforcement. She pointed out that Bernard is Black, and the area around his property up near the Berkeley border is one where people of color were historically prohibited from owning property.
Mm-hmm.
Bernard himself addressed the council before the vote. He disputed that it was 38 trees that he cut, claiming some trees had already fallen or were unhealthy before they bought the property, or that they came down in storms. He asked the council to waive the fine and let him replant the trees when he builds a house that they're proposing for that lot.
Got it. But the majority of the council was not persuaded by his argument.
No, the council members who voted yes made the case that laws need to mean something. Ramachandran said Oakland needs to be clear that people who violate its laws will face consequences. Jenkins appealed to his colleagues by asking simply, are we going to enforce the laws? Do they mean anything?
Yeah. So now what?
So Bernard and Warner still have a pending building permit application for a single family home on that lot. But if the fine goes unpaid, the city can place a lien on the property.
Meaning they might have to give up the property.
Yeah, if they can't or don't pay this huge fine.
Yeah, it's $1 million. Natalie, can you step back for a second? Why does this story matter beyond this specific case, these specific trees?
Yeah, a few reasons, depending on who's asked.
Mm-hmm.
Oakland has an urban tree canopy that took generations to grow. It's great for the environment, and it's just beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of Oakland. But it's under real pressure from development, drought, fire risk. The city has laws to protect its trees for this reason. But this case exposed how poorly those laws are enforced at times. There was a years-long gap between when Bernard first started chopping trees and when the city actually intervened.
Right.
Carol Fife and Rowena Brown felt that imposing this enormous fine was unfair to the specific property owner and raised broader questions about property ownership in Oakland overall. But other council members feel that failing to enforce the law sets a precedent. If the fine is dramatically reduced or waived because the owner is a person of color, does that actually advance equity? Or does it mean the law only applies to some people?
Right.
And at the most basic level, what does it mean for Oakland to have this protected tree ordinance if cutting down 38 trees without a permit results in no meaningful consequence? Tuesday's vote was the council's answer to that question. The law must be upheld.
Yep. Took a while and a whole lot of debate to get here, but now we have a resolution. Okay, I want to move on to another story that we recently reported that got a lot of people talking, the Rockridge Trader Joe's story. Now, Darwin reported this one, your colleague. Tell us what's being proposed.
Yeah, shout out Darwin. A developer called Align Real Estate has submitted an application to replace the Trader Joe's on College Ave and its parking lot with 2 residential towers. That would be a 25-story apartment building and a 30-story building.
Yeah.
Put another way, it's 415 apartments in total, all for seniors. It's a mix of independent living, assisted living, memory care. The building would be managed by a nonprofit.
With no ground floor retail.
Not in the current plan, so the Trader Joe's would not come back. The developer points out that the site is within walking distance of BART and College Avenue's retail corridor, which includes a nearby Safeway and Market Hall. But the Rockridge Community Planning Council pushed back. They're a neighborhood advocacy group. They called Trader Joe's a vital part of the community, noting it's the only affordable grocery option in the neighborhood, and it's the first unionized Trader Joe's in the country. A lot of neighbors agree with them. They're urging the developer to find a way to keep Trader Joe's in the project or change or avoid the project overall.
Yeah, as somebody who shops a lot in that area, goes to that Trader Joe's a lot, used to go to Pharmaca, if anybody remembers that great drugstore. It is very hard to imagine that lot without that Trader Joe's. Why do you think this story has gotten so much attention?
Yeah, I think it touched a nerve because it's such a concrete example of a tension a lot of Oaklanders feel. The city needs more housing. That's not in dispute. Senior housing is particularly a desperate need. Rockridge is one of Oakland's priciest neighborhoods, and a lot of aging adults who've lived there for decades are looking for options to stay in the community as they get older.
Sure.
Yeah, the state has even told Oakland it needs to plan for more housing in Rockridge. But people also rely on neighborhood anchors. A grocery store isn't just a place to shop. It shapes whether a neighborhood is walkable and livable, especially for those seniors who might not have cars.
Absolutely. Two stories, two different angles on how housing works and doesn't work in Oakland. Great reporting. Thank you for sharing all this with us. Now, I'm going to shift the conversation, if it's okay with you, to a big change in how Oakland deals with homeless camps. So can you walk us through what is going on?
Yeah, big change is the key phrase there. So rewind to about a year ago, Councilmember Ken Houston suggested cracking down on encampments, mainly by letting the city clear them, even when there's no other shelter available for the people living in them.
Is the city allowed to do that?
It is now. In 2024, the Supreme Court found these sorts of encampment bans constitutional. But Oakland had a policy in place requiring shelter offers, also advance notice and other outreach before sweeping a camp. Houston first proposed getting rid of this requirement last year. He also proposed other changes like allowing police to arrest people who camp illegally and allowing them to tow illegally parked vehicles like RVs, regardless of whether someone was living there.
Wow, yes, big changes indeed. So why did Houston say this was necessary? Why did he want to try to make this happen?
Yeah, so Houston represents District 7. That's Deep East Oakland. You know, its constituents are widely impacted by poverty and disinvestment. And there are also lots of homeless camps there.
Yeah.
Houston's gotten fed up with this crisis and how it's impacting the already vulnerable people he serves. He says encampments are dangerous and unhealthy for both the people living in them and those trying to live and work around them.
So we know that Houston's proposal got a lot of reaction. Natalie, fill us in on what people had to say about it.
Yeah, some people and Oakland businesses embraced it, but there was also big pushback. Lots of homeless people and their supporters have flooded the council chambers repeatedly, excoriating Houston for criminalizing homeless people and, you know, making it that much harder for unhoused people to live in Oakland.
Right.
For some context, there are only about 1,300 shelter beds in the city, but 5,500 homeless people. So the critics feared this policy would be used to keep shuffling people around or forcing them out and arresting them without giving them somewhere feasible or safe to live. A state council also warned that the policy would make Oakland ineligible for state homelessness money, and that freaked out a lot of Houston's colleagues on the council.
Got it. But it didn't stop Houston from pursuing this proposal.
That's right. But he and his co-author, Patricia Brooks, who works for Council President Kevin Jenkins, did tone down the proposal significantly as a result. Their final version no longer allows arrests of homeless people for living outside. It also still requires shelter offers in many cases when the city closes encampments. But for closures deemed emergencies or urgent, that's no longer required. So it's still a big change for Oakland. The policy also still makes changes to vehicle towing rules. Previously, vehicle dwellings like RVs or cars with people living in them were treated like any other encampment, meaning the city would do outreach and would need to offer shelter before towing them. Under Houston's policy, that's no longer true. If they're parked illegally, they can be towed outright.
Got it. And so, do I understand correctly? This is now what is going to happen. The city council has approved this new policy.
Yeah, in April, they passed it. A bunch of council members did squeeze in amendments, but then they approved it. The only person who voted no was Noel Gallo. He said the council should stop making excuses for city staff and cops who should already be clearing camps. Carol Fife abstained, concerned about the humanitarian aspects. Janani Ramachandran was absent from that meeting.
It sounds like a new era is upon us when it comes to Oakland encampments, and it is not without controversy. And this is where it gets a little complicated. Now, there's another plan on the table for homelessness, too.
Yeah, so Mayor Lee created a new Office of Homelessness Solutions shortly after she became mayor. And that office has now released a draft strategic action plan.
Okay.
The headline goal, let's say, is cutting unsheltered homelessness in Oakland by 50% over the next 5 years.
So why only 50%? Why not more?
The office was pretty direct about it. Sasha Hauswald, who led the office until recently, said she wishes they could have aimed for a total elimination of homelessness, of course, but they just don't have the resources.
Sure.
Getting to zero would cost $3 billion beyond what the city and county already spend in the course of 5 years.
Okay. So how about cutting it in half? What does that cost?
The plan identifies a roughly $285 million annual funding gap, so still a ton of money.
Yeah.
The city's biggest hope for filling in that gap is Measure W, the county's new nearly $2 billion sales tax. Officials have decided that most of that revenue will go towards homelessness, but the specific amounts are still being worked out.
Okay, so what is in the mayor's plan? What is it they want to do?
Yeah, so the mayor's plan wants to do more of what Oakland is already good at on this front: prevention. Here's how that works in Oakland. The city identifies households at the greatest risk of homelessness. These are households and people who have been homeless in the past, who pay way too much for rent, who have a criminal record. And once they've identified these folks, the city offers them financial assistance, legal help, social services. This plan that's on the table says preventing someone from becoming homeless costs $6,000 to $10,000 per household. But once someone is already homeless, getting them stabilized and off the street and into housing costs about 10 times that amount.
Wow. Okay. What about permanent housing? What does the mayor's plan want to do on that?
It says Oakland needs around 3,600 additional permanent, deeply affordable housing options in order to cut unsheltered homelessness in half. The city says moving people from interim housing into permanent supportive housing works. Most people actually remain housed after that step. The problem is Oakland can't do this anywhere near the scale needed. And the plan is pretty blunt about why. There aren't enough shelter beds or affordable units. The street basically becomes a waiting room and shelter becomes long-term housing because there's nowhere to go next.
I get that. Okay, now how about encampments, right? This is a big focus of Houston's policy. So the mayor's plan and Houston's policy, where does encampments fall in what the mayor would like to see happen?
Well, there are tensions there. The mayor's plan is pretty frank. Despite a massive increase in encampment closures last year, the number of homeless camps in Oakland actually grew. So the plan argues that without enough shelter beds, closures mostly just move people around. They don't get those people off the streets. And when a city closes a camp, it can have other domino effects. The closures can cut people off from healthcare and services. It can cause them to lose medications and critical paperwork and increase the risk of drug overdose. The mayor's plan also notes that almost half of Oakland's unsheltered residents are Black, compared to 22% of the city overall. So the closures have racially disparate impacts.
Yeah.
Given all these risks, the mayor says to essentially slow down closures when there's no shelter open.
Okay, but the policy the council just adopted, if I understood you correctly, seems to be saying exactly the opposite.
Yeah, kind of. It still says Oakland should offer shelter when it can, but it says emergency closures should move forward regardless. Since Houston's rules are a policy and the mayor's proposal is just a plan, Houston's takes precedence.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, but the mayor's plan can still set a tone within the city administration.
Okay, listeners, thank you. If you have stuck with us, we recognize this is all complicated. And, I think, Natalie, really appreciate you just kind of trying to unpack this for us and help us keep up. Okay, zooming out, what is happening here in Oakland around all of this debate, tell us about whether any city can actually solve homelessness?
Yeah, I mean, effective strategies do exist. Prevention works, permanent supportive housing works. The research is all pretty consistent on that. The problem, especially for cities in California, is scale and money. So Oakland can point to these programs that are effective, but it can't fund them anywhere near the level needed. The state is running a massive deficit, and the federal government is looking to cut homelessness funding, not expand it.
Right.
So in some ways, this new plan is a roadmap for what Oakland would do if it had the resources. Whether those resources materialize is a whole other question. And there's a tension to work out between Houston's policy and the mayor's plan, which the council still hasn't adopted. Altogether, this raises questions about what exactly will happen to the homeless population in Oakland and where people will go next.
Natalie, thank you so much.
Thanks, Tasneem.
You can find all of Natalie Orenstein's reporting on housing at oaklandside.org. We'll link to everything we talked about here in the show notes. Let me tell you about some more recent reporting from our newsroom. There's more in the full stories, which we will link to in the show notes, and you can always find at oaklandside.org. Sign up for the daily newsletter if you want to get our reporting in your inbox. To start out, Oakland lost one of its most beloved muralists this week. Dan Fontes, born and raised in Oakland, died on April 28th at age 67 after a battle with cancer. You have almost certainly seen his work around town. The giraffes painted on freeway underpasses, the zebras, the sea turtles. His Giraffics mural beneath I-580 at Oakland and Harrison Streets has been a landmark since 1983. Fontes fought hard to preserve his work, raising tens of thousands of dollars over the years for restorations. He also went to court to protect muralists' rights when a car dealership painted over one of his pieces without notice. Fellow muralist David Burke, who credits Fontes as his inspiration, wrote in a tribute that encountering the first giraffe mural as an 8-year-old, quote, planted a seed that would quietly shape my path as an artist. No public memorial has been announced yet. We will keep you in the loop on that. Azucena Racia has the full tribute at oaklandside.org. Next up, the Oakland Diocese of the Catholic Church announced it is going to close 7 Oakland churches, 13 total across Alameda and Contra Costa counties. The reasons are twofold: declining attendance and an ongoing financial crisis tied to sexual abuse lawsuits. The diocese has faced hundreds of lawsuits from survivors of clergy abuse dating back to the 1960s through the 1990s. Among the Oakland churches that are closing is Our Lady of Lourdes near Lake Merritt. Azucena Racia has the full list and more context at oaklandside.org. Let's talk about the DA's race. The Alameda County District Attorney race is heating up financially. Eli Wolf reports that incumbent Ursula Jones Dixon raised nearly $300,000 in the first months of 2026, more than 4 times what her challenger, Pamela Price, brought in over the same time period. Jones Dixon has drawn heavy support from prosecutors in her own office, also from building trades unions and real estate interests. Now, Price, who was recalled by voters in 2024 and is now mounting a comeback bid, has raised significantly less and has loaned her own campaign money to stay afloat. A third candidate, attorney Gopal Krishnan, raised just under $30,000. The primary is in June. Some good news. The Mosswood Rec Center has reopened after nearly a decade. You may recall the original building was destroyed by fire in 2016. That ended preschool arts and cooking programs that had been happening there since the center first opened back in 1953. Now, the new 2-story, 12,000 square foot building has a social hall, classrooms, a kitchen, computer lab, maker space. Construction on the roughly $20 million facility wrapped up recently, and Natalie Orenstein has the story. I've got a few updates from you from our NOSH team. Tenny East Kitchen, the acclaimed Burmese restaurant, is now open in its new Piedmont Avenue location. Dave & Buster's has opened in Jack London Square. And Katu House, a popular Cambodian noodle soup spot, is back, operating on weekends at A&R Market on Foothill. Okay, now on to the closures. Grinders, the Montclair sandwich shop that served the neighborhood for 35 years, has quietly closed after the owner retired. And La Mexicana in Fruitvale, this was a Bay Area institution that opened in 1932, has reportedly closed after 94 years. Finally, events coming up. 5-10 Day is this Sunday, May 10th at Lake Merritt, noon to 8. Now in its 11th year, the free volunteer-run gathering celebrates Oakland culture and opposes gentrification. This year's event includes a marketplace, photo booth, and a special altar for mothers who are no longer with us. Follow 5-10 Day on Instagram for day of updates. All right, that is it for headlines. We will link to all of this in the show notes. That is this week's episode of Oaklandside 510. You can find all the stories we talked about today at oaklandside.org. Sign up for our daily newsletter to get this reporting in your inbox. If you haven't already, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. You know I love reading those. I check every week. This episode was produced by Mark Nieto and Jessica Plachek and hosted by me, Tasneem Raja. On behalf of our entire newsroom, thank you for showing up for Oakland. Thank you for getting in the weeds with us on this episode. We will see you next week.